When Madonna's black limousine drove past homeless veteran Michael Torres, holding a cardboard sign reading "Help Veteran Hungry" on a New York City street corner, she did something that would change both their lives forever. What happened next proved that sometimes the most powerful act isn't performing for millions, it's stopping for one person everyone else ignores. It was November 15th, 2005, on a cold evening in Manhattan. Madonna was being driven to rehearsals for her Confessions tour when her car slowed at a red light on West 44th Street. Through the tinted window she saw him, a middle-aged man with weathered skin and haunted eyes, sitting against a building with a cardboard sign and a small American flag. Michael Torres was 52 years old, a decorated Gulf War veteran who had served with the 82nd Airborne Division. He had returned from Desert Storm with severe PTSD, lost his career as a firefighter, watched his marriage crumble, been separated from his 3 children, and eventually ended up on the streets of New York. He'd been homeless for 4 years. What Madonna did next had never been done before by a celebrity of her stature. She told her driver to pull over. Michael Torres hadn't always been the invisible man on the street corner. 20 years earlier, he had been Sergeant Michael Torres, 82nd Airborne Division, jumping into combat zones and leading men through some of the most intense fighting of the Gulf War. He had grown up in the Bronx, the son of Puerto Rican immigrants who had instilled in him a deep sense of duty and service. Joining the military at 19, Michael had found purpose, brotherhood, and a sense of belonging he'd never experienced before. During Desert Storm, Michael's unit had seen heavy combat. He had saved 2 fellow soldiers' lives during an ambush, earning him a Bronze Star with valor. But the things he saw and did during those months in Iraq left invisible wounds that would take years to fully manifest. When he returned to New York in 1991, Michael seemed fine. He joined the FDNY, married his high school sweetheart Elena, and they had 3 children, David, Sophia, and little Maria. For a decade he was living the American dream, but by 2001 the nightmares had started. The flashbacks were getting worse. The sound of sirens, which he heard constantly as a firefighter, triggered panic attacks. He started self-medicating with alcohol to quiet the memories of bodies burning in the desert, of friends dying in his arms, of the children he couldn't save. Elena begged him to get help, but the VA system was overwhelmed and underfunded. Wait times for mental health services stretched for months. Michael fell through the cracks, one of thousands of veterans whose invisible wounds were destroying them from the inside. By 2003, he'd lost his job with the FDNY. By 2004, Elena had taken the children and left. By 2005, Michael was on the streets, just another homeless veteran in a city full of people too busy to notice. That November evening, Michael wasn't expecting anything except maybe enough money for a hot meal. He'd been holding his sign for hours, and most people walked past without even looking at him. That's what years on the street had taught him. He was invisible. When the black limousine pulled over and the window rolled down, Michael assumed the driver was going to tell him to move along. Instead, he heard a woman's voice with a distinctive Michigan accent. "What's your name?" Michael looked up, confused. The voice sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it through the tinted window. Michael Torres, ma'am. You're a veteran." "Yes, ma'am. 82nd Airborne. Desert Storm." The back door of the limousine opened, and Madonna stepped out onto the sidewalk of West 44th Street. She was wearing simple clothes and minimal makeup, but Michael recognized her immediately. His jaw dropped. Madonna walked up to him and, to his complete shock, extended her hand, not to give him money, but to shake his hand like an equal. "Thank you for your service, Michael," she said, looking directly into his eyes. "Tell me your story. I want to hear it." For the next 15 minutes, Madonna sat on the cold sidewalk next to Michael Torres, while her security team nervously watched the street. Passers-by started to notice, pulling out their phones, but Madonna ignored them all. She was focused entirely on Michael. He told her everything: the combat, the PTSD, the failed attempts to get help from the VA, the loss of his family, the descent into homelessness. As he talked, tears rolled down his face, the first time he'd cried in years. Madonna listened without interrupting, without judging, without pulling out her phone or looking distracted. When Michael finished his story, she was quiet for a moment. "Michael, I lost someone very important to me when I was young. Madonna said quietly. "My mother. And I spent my whole life trying to fill that emptiness by achieving things, by being seen, by being important. But you know what I realized? The most important thing we can do isn't performing for millions of people. It's seeing the people right in front of us, who everyone else has decided are invisible." She looked at her security team, then back at Michael. "I'm going to my rehearsal right now," she said. "But I'm coming back. Can you wait here for me? 2 hours. Can you do that?" Michael nodded, not quite believing this was real. "Promise me you'll be here," Madonna insisted, "because I'm going to come back, and we're going to figure this out together." True to her word, 2 hours later, Madonna's limousine returned to the same street corner. This time she wasn't alone. She had brought Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a trauma psychologist who specialized in PTSD treatment, and James Chen, a social worker who had helped her establish her charitable foundation. Michael had waited, half convinced that the whole encounter had been a hallucination, but when Madonna stepped out of the car again, he realized it had been real. "Michael," Madonna said, "you fought for your country. Now I'm going to fight for you." That night, Madonna didn't just hand Michael cash for food. She made him a promise that would change the trajectory of both their lives. She would commit whatever resources were necessary to help him rebuild his life. What happened over the next 3 years was nothing short of miraculous, not because of money, but because someone with resources chose to see a human being instead of a problem. Within a week, Madonna had arranged and fully funded a comprehensive PTSD assessment at a private trauma center, 6 months of intensive trauma therapy with Dr. Mitchell, a spot in a transitional housing program in Queens, complete medical and dental care, new clothes and personal items, a prepaid phone so they could stay in contact. But the most important thing Madonna provided wasn't any of these material things. It was her personal attention. Every week, she would call Michael to check on his progress. Every month, she would meet with him in person to hear how he was doing. "She didn't treat me like a charity case," Michael later recalled. "She treated me like a person who had hit a rough patch and needed support to get back on his feet." That made all the difference. The PTSD therapy was intense and painful. Michael had to confront memories he'd spent years trying to suppress. There were setbacks, including a brief relapse into drinking that nearly derailed everything. But Madonna didn't abandon him when things got difficult. "You don't give up on people just because recovery isn't linear," she told Dr. Mitchell during one of their coordination meetings. "Michael spent years in combat for his country. The least we can do is stick with him during the tough days." 6 months into his treatment, Michael had made enough progress that Dr. Mitchell felt he was ready for something that terrified him more than combat ever had: reaching out to his family. Michael's ex-wife Elena and their 3 children, David, now 19, Sophia 17, and Maria 15, hadn't seen or heard from him in 4 years. The last time they'd had contact, Michael had been deep in his addiction, saying things he didn't mean, hurting the people he loved most. Madonna helped arrange the reunion, offering her home in Manhattan as neutral territory and having Dr. Mitchell present to facilitate the conversation. When Elena walked in with David, Sophia, and Maria, Michael broke down crying. His children barely recognized the clean, sober, healthier man sitting before them. "Dad?" Sophia whispered, tears streaming down her face. The reunion was emotional and complicated. Years of pain and abandonment couldn't be healed in one afternoon, but it was a start, and Madonna sat quietly in the corner, giving them space but providing support when needed. Over the following months, Michael slowly rebuilt his relationship with his children. It wasn't easy. There was anger, hurt, and deep wounds that needed time to heal. But with consistent therapy and Michael's sobriety, trust began to return. By 2007, Michael had been sober for 2 years and was living independently in a small apartment in Queens, but he felt like something was missing. His own recovery had shown him how many other veterans were struggling with PTSD and homelessness, falling through the same cracks he had fallen through. He approached Madonna with an idea. What if they created a comprehensive support center specifically for veterans dealing with PTSD and homelessness? A place that addressed not just housing, but the underlying trauma that led to homelessness in the first place. Madonna immediately said yes. She committed $2 million of her own money to get the project started and used her celebrity platform to attract additional funding and support. In 2008, The Torres Veterans Support Center opened in the Bronx, named after Michael at Madonna's insistence. The center provided trauma-informed care, housing assistance, job training, and peer support, all under one roof. Michael became the center's first director of peer support services. His lived experience as a homeless veteran with PTSD made him uniquely qualified to connect with other veterans who were going through similar struggles. The Torres Veterans Support Center quickly became a model for veteran services nationwide. Unlike traditional approaches that treated homelessness and PTSD as separate issues, the center recognized that for many veterans, they were inextricably linked. Michael's leadership was transformational. He understood the shame, the isolation, the sense of being broken that so many veterans felt. He could look them in the eye and say, "I've been where you are. I slept on the streets. I lost everything. But recovery is possible." Within 3 years, the center had served over 500 veterans. Within 5 years, similar programs were being established in cities across the country, all modeled after the approach Madonna and Michael had pioneered. But perhaps the most significant impact came in 2010, when Michael was invited to testify before the House Committee on Veterans Affairs about the gaps in mental health services for veterans. On March 15, 2010, Michael Torres stood before Congress to tell his story. Madonna sat in the gallery, quietly watching the man she had stopped for on a Manhattan street corner 5 years earlier. "My name is Michael Torres," he began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "5 years ago, I was a homeless veteran living on the streets of New York City. I had served my country with honor, but when I came home broken, my country wasn't there for me." He talked about the inadequate mental health services, the months-long wait times, the lack of coordinated care between housing and mental health services. He talked about how thousands of veterans were falling through the same cracks he had fallen through. "But I'm not here just to talk about problems," Michael continued. "I'm here to talk about solutions, because 5 years ago, someone saw me when I was invisible. Someone stopped when everyone else kept walking, and that changed everything." He described the comprehensive, trauma-informed approach of the Torres Veterans Support Center and how it had helped hundreds of veterans rebuild their lives. "We need a national network of centers like this," Michael testified. "We need the VA to recognize that veteran homelessness isn't about character, it's about failed systems, and we need to commit the resources to fix those systems." His testimony was powerful, moving, and backed by data from the center's success. Several committee members had tears in their eyes. Michael's testimony, combined with Madonna's behind-the-scenes advocacy and the documented success of the Torres Veterans Support Center, helped influence the passage of the Veterans Second Chance Act in 2012. The act provided $250 million in funding for comprehensive veteran support centers across the country, mandated coordination between VA mental health services and housing assistance, and reduced wait times for PTSD treatment. By 2015, there were 47 centers across America, modeled after the original Torres Veterans Support Center. Tens of thousands of veterans had been helped. Veteran homelessness had decreased by 33% in areas where the centers operated. And Michael Torres, the man who had once been invisible on a Manhattan street corner, had become one of the nation's leading advocates for veteran mental health. In 2018, Madonna invited Michael to join her on stage during her Madame X tour stop at Madison Square Garden. She wanted to share his story with the world. Michael walked out onto the stage where Madonna had performed for millions, and she told the audience how they had met 13 years earlier on a street corner just a few blocks away. "I've achieved a lot in my career," Madonna said, her voice emotional. "But stopping my car that November night and meeting Michael, that's the thing I'm most proud of. Because it reminds me that success isn't about how many people know your name. It's about seeing the people everyone else has decided are invisible." She looked at Michael, standing beside her in front of 20,000 people. "Michael fought for his country when his country needed him. When Michael needed help, I had the privilege of fighting for him. But the truth is, Michael didn't need saving. He needed someone to see him, to believe in him, and to provide support while he saved himself.